This is a season in which the longing that we have to be together needs to be translated into prayerful yearning that God would bring us closer together.
But also to think, who are the people who live alone in a one-person household where we could just check in for a kind of coffee break, and these have
with appropriate social distancing.
Yeah, exactly. And these have all been very, I mean, it's actually very good for us as well.
And when they do that, you haven't closed the church. You've expanded the church. You've brought the church into the neighborhood. And the church is still the church, even if the doors are closed.
I miss meeting with my brothers and sisters too. I'm a teacher. Our classes are closed in the sense that we're not gathering together face to face, breathing the same air in the same room anymore. But we are doing our classes by distance. This is Sunday, and this morning I was able to participate in worship with brothers and sisters through live streaming. But it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not the same as sitting next to Cynthia Powell, someone we usually sit with in our worship services on a Sunday morning, and talking with her about her life and her family and all of that. It's not the same. Worship's not the same. Service is not the same. It has changed, and I think we grieve that, and this is one of those griefs that I think it's fair for us to take to God and talk to God about, because we're missing something that's really valuable and important to us.
And I think we have to recognize that this is not going to be easy for the church, especially if the church is defined as the gathering of God's people. That's what the Greek word ecclesia means. It's the gathered people of God. And if the church can't gather together on a Sunday morning, or if it isn't wise for the church to gather together on a Sunday morning, that's a huge handicap. It's part of our essential nature. We need to recognize that that's going to be hard, and it's not an ideal situation.
Well, certainly as the people of God, those who are assembling, there's a very real sense in which, I mean, ideally, under no question, ideally the assembly of people coming together in a common location is the way we ought to do this. And I certainly hope and pray that the people of God, after this crisis is over, will not revert and to the ways of the new strategy of isolated worship and watching virtual church and so forth and so on, because that misses the point. Nothing can replace the face-to-face contact.
Wow, closing churches. Sounds ominous, doesn't it? We're going to close our church. Well, no. We're not going to close our church. Are we going to stop meeting for a little while? We're going to do that because we don't want to spread the disease. We want to do that so that we can flatten the curve, you might say, and allow space for people in hospitals, and we don't overwhelm hospitals, as has happened many times before. So we're going to stop meeting together in large numbers for the sake of loving our neighbor, and loving our elderly, and loving those who are most susceptible. We're going to stop meeting together, but we don't stop being church.
And I think it goes back to even to what the church is. So one thing I've been taught from childhood in churches of Christ, the church isn't a building. A church is the assembly. The church is the people. We are the church. And so the church isn't closed. We're still here, and we can still be engaged in ministry with one another.
Our own church is not meeting. And I just would like to remind people that, go back and read the Old Testament prophets about the temple. I mean, church, yes, is not the building, and it's not gathering of necessarily thousands of people together. It is where two or three together. And at least in the interim time, it is important to communicate with one another. What is church for? It's to encourage each other, to pray for each other, to let each other know that we are with each other. And therefore, I know that I hear some people that feel a sense of tremendous loss, but also a sense of guilt that they're not gathering with the saints in a particular location. And I would just like to say to people that the first church met in homes, and that we can, on an interim basis, meet with our families, pray over Zoom with our brothers and sisters, and encourage each other in that way. And it won't last forever.
But all we can do, I think, is hope and try to find creative new ways of communing with one another, standing in solidarity with one another. And I've just been impressed at the amount of creative ideas that I've seen in many different situations among many of my friends. They've had wonderful, imaginative ideas of how we can stay in touch with one another, have these kind of virtual coffee times or virtual prayer times or virtual church, interactive different ways. We can get through this. It's not ideal, but we can find ways around it.
But I'm a member of the body of Christ as an individual and as a group. And while indeed where two or three are gathered together, there am I in the midst of them, Jesus says, we gather on the Lord's Day with that virtual church. We've done it the last two Lord's Days at College Church. And, we prepare the Lord's Supper, and I still feel a sense of connectedness when everybody's taking the Lord's Supper together. I'll admit it felt a little awkward to be singing, just my wife and me, following along with the song leader and so forth on the worship service. But then I thought, this is good. This is still lifting up voices to God.
We celebrated the Lord's Supper, just me and my wife here in our home on our own in Abilene, Texas, along with a lot of other people who were celebrating the Lord's Supper at the same time, connected with our congregation, and frankly, many people around the world. And I became more acutely aware than ever that there were people all around the world doing the very same thing. And I felt more closely connected to the global church at that moment than I tend to do on a regular Sunday morning.
But let's go even beyond that. Let's say that we are left with only private moments of relationship with God. I assume most of us have families, but a lot of people are going to be in their private moments as well with God, and that's nothing wrong with that either. In fact, Jesus was alone for 40 days in the wilderness.
What Benedict provided, again, was a place of structure, a place of learning, a place of worship, making our own places of quarantine. In my case, it's my house. You've probably seen people coming up and down the stairs. There are people here. Is to make this an environment that has some structure in it, not just for the kids, but also for the adults. An environment where we can worship, an environment that, has some regulations, but also some mercy as well, an environment of learning, and maybe to form some habits that we should have had already that we may have neglected when it comes to worship and prayer.
When the temple was finally destroyed in 586, that was the very question Israel had to answer, is how do you do church without a temple? And for many of them, they continue to pray. Prayer was their biggest connection, because even when the temple was built, it was a temporary place for God's name to dwell. And so they always believed that the temple was a physical reminder of God's presence, but it wasn't God. So they could pray without a physical place.
But does that mean we close the church? No, we are the church. We people are the church. We've always said that, right? Here's the steeple and there's the people, right? I mean, that's what we've always done. But now we're going to have to live it. Now we're not going to have the crutch of, oh, I go to church on Sunday. No, now we got to be the church every day, which is what we've always claimed and what we've always wanted to do. But now we get to do it. When you get to do it with some focus. So where's the church going to be? Church is going to be with their neighbor. Church is going to check on the elderly in your neighborhood, see if they have toilet paper.
But there's another sense in which, as the people of God, there are still those needs to assist, people who are assisting, feeding the school kids that are out of school, providing them lunches that the school is not providing anymore, and benevolence kind of issues, serving and caring, while we're social distancing as best we can. But sometimes even that may need to be breached, depending on what's going on. And certainly our healthcare people are having to address that. So I think there's a danger in thinking in terms of church simply as an assembled together kind of scene, although that is a framework that is important, that we come together with a regularity. But I'm still part of the called out. I'm still part of the people of God, even by myself. And I need to function and behave in that fashion to give honor and glory to God.
I'm thankful we live in a time with the technology that we do. We can be in touch with people face to face, even if we can't be close to one another. We have telephones we can call people with. And so there's a number of ways that we can be engaged in the lives of others through social media, through just reaching out in different ways. And I really would encourage us to be engaged in that fundamental work as the church. There are going to be people in our churches who really struggle with loneliness during this time, who really struggle with some psychological issues, just being alone or anxiety. And then for us to touch base with those in our church and some of the least of these who may be alone during this time, who may be in need, I think is going to be a real powerful way for us to be the church today. Another way I almost am certain we're going to have to be the church is through blessing each other financially. We're going to have members who are in deep financial need. And so we're going to have an opportunity to really be the church by caring for one another in this difficult time.
They will provide the needs at their own cost and their own sacrifice. They'll provide the needs of those who have needs. And when they do that, you haven't closed the church. You've expanded the church. You brought the church into the neighborhood. And the church is still the church, even if the doors are closed.
But I was thinking about a wonderful prayer that is in a first century text that we call the Didache. And this early prayer for communion, which talks about the broken bread being scattered over the hills and gathering together and becoming one. So, the writer says, let your church be gathered together from the ends of the earth into your kingdom, Lord. For yours is the glory and the power through Jesus Christ forever. But this wonderful prayer, written and used in Syrian Antioch in the 80s and 90s of the first century, when the church was just a tiny minority and people were scattered all over the place, that harken back to the feeding of the 5,000 and how that a single loaf, or a few loaves, right, got split up into fragments all upon the hillside, and then the disciples gathered them back up into baskets. And this guy is praying that God will do the same to his church. This is a season in which the longing that we have to be together needs to be translated into prayerful yearning that God would bring us closer together. that God would bring us, of course, back together after the virus crisis is over, but also that he would make us even closer than we were before that, make us more unified than we were before that, and draw us more closely to the people of God around the world.